127,000 Rand. That is what it cost for a 35% tech company in Sandton just to open up its doors every morning. And this doesn't even include their rent or their salaries, not even the AWS bill. That's just the tax you pay to make sure that when your developers arrive around 8 a.m., their desks are still there, their data is still there, and nobody spent the night walking out with the machines that run your business. And as of May 2026, the South African grid is more stable than it's been for years. But stability isn't a safety net. And the founders who have figured that out are the ones who are still standing. So I was on a call with a founder last week, and let's call him Anton. Anton runs a 5% tech company in Sandton. And when I asked him what his biggest monthly cost was, he didn't say your your typical salaries. What he said is they need business. And basically, I want to show you how his money actually moves. And we're going to start with his physical security because this guy spends about 42,000 a month for two armed guards, biometric entry on every door. Because in the so-called stable era, quote unquote stable era, theft has become more sophisticated, not least. So the threat profile has shifted from opportunistic to precision. So these guys, they are not after your chairs and your monitors anymore. They are after the high value portable equipment, the kind that disappears overnight and gets wiped clean and reappears in another city within 48 hours. And Anton learned that the hard way. This guy spends about 31,000 Rand a month on cybersecurity. That includes your enterprise grade protection, your tab web monitoring, and your quarterly red team testing. Because bear in mind that South Africa pulled in somewhere of not of $700 million in venture capital last year, which was one of our best year ever. And that money is not invisible. It sits in our local banks and that flows through our local startups. And the sophisticated ransomware operation that used to write off this continent as not worth the effort, these guys have recalculated. So you are not being targeted by a teenager in the basement anymore. You're being targeted by a corporation. Then there's the fuel cost. Anton has also a backup generator. And in a year of localized grid instability, what Eskom now calls quote unquote load reduction, targeted cuts to high density areas, the generator is not optional anymore, but diesel has crossed around 31 to 38 cents per litre, up from 26 Rand just about 3 years ago. And a single 15 kilowatt unit running a full workday burns around 72 to 73,000 Rand in fuel every month. So the security budget that looked like 18,000 Rand is actually 90,000 Rand once you factor in the fuel needed to keep it operational. The tank is as valuable as the generator, as you can see. And Anton's total cost for the fortress that he built is 127,000 Rand a month. And this guy still think it's the best money he spent. Now, before you start complaining, let me show you the alternative. Let's say there's another company in the same sector, the same revenue, and let's call these guys BrightSpark. BrightSpark took the lean operation, and these guys spend about 18,000 Rand a month in security. That includes a basic alarm, one gate guard, which is sensible and efficient and capital preserving. But over the next 18 months, these guys got hit about 4 times. And their direct hardware loss total to 615,000 Rand, which just evaporated like that. But here's the number that doesn't show up in the police report. I'm talking about the indirect loss. And that includes the trauma of the first break-in that led to 2 senior devs to quietly start updating their CVs. How about the 3-month delay on their flagship product because the drive it was built on walked out of the door? And lastly, the insurance premium that tripled after the incident number 2. You see, that indirect cost came to around 1,015,000 rand. So these guys, they save roughly 100,000 a month on security, but they lost 1.6 million rand in a year and a half. And at the end of it, they'd lose the trust of two enterprise clients who started asking uncomfortable questions about the data continuity. You see, and in this market, in 2026, trust is the only currency that doesn't devalue. But here's the part that flipped the story for me. Amton, our 127k founder a month, just closed a 4.2 million government contract. And the reason he won wasn't price, because his competitor was 15% cheaper. He won because his Fortress met the 2026 security compliance certificates, the new benchmarks that enterprise and government clients are using to decide who gets near their data. And that includes your biometric access logs, your cyber insurance, documented operational redundancy. His competitor had none of those. So to the procurement team, they didn't even look efficient, it looked dangerous. So this is the reframe that matters. The Fortress is not a tax, it's an entry visa. And if you can prove your system can survive Johannesburg, you can sell those same systems anywhere in the world that looks like Johannesburg. So to understand why a 35-person company spends about 127,000 a month on a Fortress, you have to understand something about the environment they are operating in. And to make that precise, we built a framework and we call it the Infrastructure Hostility Index. So this is not a government stat, it's not an academic metric. It's a tool we use to measure how hard the environment itself is working against your business, and that includes 4 variables. Which number 1 is your physical theft frequency, number 2 is your cyber insurance rate, then number 3 is your supply chain disruption, and lastly, your time to recovery when something goes wrong. In a low hostile market, let's say Amsterdam, your IHI is somewhere around 15%. So the state provides most of the fortress. That includes the roads. Then you know your power's on, and you know that the courts move fast enough to deter most of your bad actors. And you can afford to be lean because the infrastructure is essentially working for you. But in Johannesburg, before you've built a single layer of protection, our analysis already puts you at somewhere between 60 to 80%. You see, that number means this: if you do nothing, the probability of a catastrophic event hitting your balance sheet this year, and I'm talking about your precision hardware theft, your ransomware attacks, your logistic crisis, or even your localized grid failure, those events are no longer a coin flip. It's closer to a certainty that it might happen. So the question is not if, but the question should be how much will it cost when it happens. So here's the math that keeps the founders broke, and it's not that complicated. Prevention is a bounded cost. You know it's 127,000 rand. It's on the spreadsheet. It doesn't surprise you. But failure is unbounded. It can be 600,000 rand. It can be 1.6 million rand. It can be the resignation email from your best engineer at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. So you can't model the ceiling on that. And the insurance industry has figured this out. You see, a standard commercial premium for a 35-person tech firm in Johannesburg with security basic that runs roughly around 45,000 a month. But if you walk into the same insurer with documented Fortress infrastructure, the biometric logs, the endpoint protection certificates, the immutable backup protocol, that premium drops to somewhere around 28,000 rand. So that's a 17,000 rand a month saving from just the paperwork your Fortress generates. A Fortress discount effectively baked into your monthly OPEX. So the 127,000 rand Fortress is already 17,000 rand cheaper than it looks, and that's before we even talk about what it opens. So there's a shift in thinking that separates the founders who survive our high hostile environments from the ones who don't, and I want to name it clearly. Most founders trained in low hostile markets think probabilistically. They ask, what are the odds this happens? And they run expected value calculations. They decide the risk is low enough to not insure against it. Operators, the founders who've built companies in high hostile environments, think deterministically. They've stopped asking, If and they started asking, when this happens, how fast do we recover? And that's not pessimism, that's precision. Because here's the reality of Johannesburg in May 2026. Eskom's outlook for this winter is generally optimistic. The national grid is holding back. The new trend isn't national collapse, it's localized disruption. It's illegal connections, infrastructure theft, overloaded substations in high density nodes. These are the things that can take your specific block offline for 48 hours with no warning and no ETA. So when you stop treating that as a surprise and start treating it as a scheduled event, your whole approach to operations changes. So you don't optimize for efficiency, you optimize for resilience. And you stop building for perfect conditions and you start building for the conditions that actually exist. So in Johannesburg, lean is just another word for unprepared. And finally, when a sophisticated investor or enterprise client looks at your company in May 2026, they are not just looking at your product, they are looking at your infrastructure. They want to know whether you are a professional or an amateur, not in your code, but in your judgment. So your best developers, the ones currently being recruited by European firms offering 3 times the salary and a relocation package, they don't leave companies just for money. They leave companies that feel unstable. They leave places where the subtext of every workday is, I'm not sure if this is going to be okay. So what you need to do is build a fortress and you remove that subtext. You give them the psychological bandwidth to focus on the work. And in the talent market, this competitive, that is worth more than almost any other investment you can make. So the fortress isn't about fear, it's about seriousness. It's the visible proof that you understand the terrain. So the fortress is not a product you buy, it's a system build. And it has 3 layers: physical, digital, and operational. If you skip any one of them, the other two become expensive gears. So let me take you through each one of them. And I'm going to start with layer one, which is your physical perimeter. Layer one is about deterrence and detection. In Johannesburg right now, the threat profile has shifted toward what security professions are calling precision heist, organized operations targeting high value liquid assets. So your job is to make sure your facility looks like the wrong choice before anyone gets close enough to even try. So the perimeter starts with electrified fencing fitted with tension sensors. The capex on that will cost you around 80,000 rand to 150,000 rand for a standard facility. If you are in a high crime node, you add your hydraulic bollards, your vehicle barriers designed to stop a bucket at speed, because at 31 rand a litre, your diesel reserves are as attractive target as your hardware. How about your access control? We need to retire the RFID cards because in 2026, that's the security theater. So what you're going to need is biometric fingerprint scanners at every entry point, which will cost you around 15,000 to 25,000 per door. And they deliver 2 things the cards can't, which is number one, a forensic biometric log that satisfies your insurance audit, and a authentication that cannot be cloned or linked. So that's really important. And we're gonna have to also look into your guarding. This is your heaviest ongoing cost. So you're gonna need 2 armed guards during the day and one overnight from a reputable firm with a sub 5 minute armed response contract. So the budget on that will be around 28,000 to 42,000 rand a month. So this is not optional. And last, we need to look at surveillance. So you're going to need 8 to 12 cameras with night vision and cloud sync redundancy. And the capex on that will be 40,000 to 80,000 rand a month. And we also need to look at your monthly monitoring, which will cost you about 3,000 to 5,000 rand a month. So that's your total physical layer, and your monthly OPEX on that, it's between 39,000 rand to 62,000 rand. Then you need to go into layer two, the digital security, and this one requires a mindset shift. So 9 in 10 breaches begin with phishing emails, not a sophisticated attack or a fake invoice or a cloned login page, someone clicking something they shouldn't at 5 p.m. on a Friday. So the entire edifice of your digital security rests on whether your people are trained and whether your systems are watching. So we're going to start with endpoint protection, your enterprise grade EDR, your endpoint detection and response on every device in your company. We're talking about your CrowdStrike, your Sentinel One tiers, not the consumer free versions for a 35-person company. That would cost you around 17,000 to 28,000 Rand annually. So that works out to less than the cost of 1 day of downtime after a breach. Then we need to look at email and phishing defense, advanced threat protection, plus mandatory quarterly phishing simulations for every staff. That would cost you about 8,000 to 15,000 Rand a month. And this is the most cost effective line in your entire security budget relative to the risk it mitigates. How about penetration testing? Every quarter, you hire professionals to try to break your systems. Not because you think they are broken, but because you need to know before your adversary does. And the cost in that would be around 40,000 to 60,000 Rand per test. So this is where most farmers get lazy. So you should not. And last, we have to look at cyber insurance. In 2026, you cannot win a meaningful enterprise contract without a certificate. So premiums on that is around 15,000 to 25,000 a month with significant reductions if you can show documented infrastructure. So the total digital layer, your monthly OPEX is around 31,000 to 56,000 Rand. So now we're going to go into layer 3. So the layer 3 is the one where most companies skip, and it's the reason that when layers 1 and 2 are tested, the business survives anyway. So we're going to start with data distribution, which is the same strategy I'm currently using. So this is not a cloud backup system. This is a triple redundant architecture. One local copy in your Johannesburg data center for speed, one regional cloud copy for failover, one immutable copy in an offshore bucket. You see, the kind that ransomware architecture cannot override for sovereignty. So even if your localized load reduction event takes out your entire Joburg node, the business keeps running. Your monthly cost in that will be around 8,000 to 18,000 Rand a month. So now we also need to look at standby power readiness. Eskom's winter outlook is optimistic, but load reduction is still real. So your specific block can go dark for about 48 hours without warning. So generator maintenance, diesel reserves, and fuel tariff security for those reserves would cost you around 18,000 to 25,000 Rand a month. And last, we need to look at your legal and forensic retainer. So if you get hit at 2 a.m., you do not want to be searching the internet for cybercrime attorney. You want someone who answers because you pay them to be ready. So 10,000 to 20,000 a month keeps a legal and forensic team on standby. And your total operational layer or your monthly OPEX on that is around 36,000 to 63,000 Rand. And if we add it all up, 127,000 to 223,000 Rand every single month for a company doing 18 million a year, that's a 8 to 15% of your revenue just to keep your people safe and your data intact. So I know how it sounds like. It sounds like a South African takes on ambition, but it's not. I'm going to show you why this isn't really an expense and that it's the highest yielding investment on your balance sheet. So let's run the numbers the way a CFO would. Two identical tech companies, both in Johannesburg, both in May 2026. Both have 35 employees. Both generate about 18 million Rand in annual revenue with a 33% gross margin, but both have different security strategies. So I'm going to start with company A, which is lean. They spend about 18,000 Rand a month. That includes a basic alarm, one gate guard, standby antivirus, and their annual security bill is around 216,000 Rand, which is disciplined and efficient. But they operate in a high hostile environment with roughly 80% probability of a major incident in any given year. So when one hits, and based on the data, one will, the average direct loss runs around 350,000 Rand. So if we run the expected value, 80% chance of a 350,000 Rand loss is a 280,000 Rand in expected annual damage. And you need to add the 560,000 Rand in indirect cost I'm talking about your lost productivity, your senior staff turnover, your client confidence damage, and company A is actually bleeding. And if you think about it, company A is actually bleeding over 1 million every year, even before an incident becomes a certainty. Then company B runs the full fortress, 150,000 a month, 1.8 million a year, a number that on its own looks reckless. But the incident probability drops to around 5%. The expected loss, 5% of 100,000 is 5,000 a year. So the documented infrastructure earns them a 200,000 Rand annual discount on insurance premiums. The total adjusted security cost is 1.6 million Rand. So on paper, company B spends 549,000 more than company A. But if the math ended there, the CFO would have fired the security team on the spot. But the math doesn't end there. Company B doesn't win because they saved money on theft. They won because the fortress opened doors that company A doesn't even know exist. Enterprise and government clients in 2026 have a new procurement question. It's not just how much does it cost, it's can you pass a security audit? Biometric access logs, cyber insurance, documented redundancy. Without those, you don't get past the first conversation. So company B, the Fortress, wins a 4.2 million Rand annual contract on the strength on their compliance documentation alone. Company A was 50% cheaper, but they don't get called back. You see, at a 35% margin, that 4.2 million Rand contract generates about 1.47 million in gross profit. Profit at company A would their 18,000 Rand security budget simply cannot access. Then there's productivity. While company A loses 3 to 6 weeks a year dealing with incidents, hardware theft, ransom recovery, the aftermath of a break in, company B keeps running. That's another 450,000 Rand in saved productivity annually. And talent retention in a market where your best developers are receiving relocation offers from European companies, keeping one extra person because they feel safe, because the company feels serious and stable, saves you about 180,000 Rand in recruitment fees. So here's what company B's real security math looks like. The total cost, negative 1.6 million Rand. New contract gross profit is a positive of 1.47 million Rand. The productivity and talent value is a positive of 630,000 Rand. So the net annual position is a positive of 495,000 Rand. So the fortress doesn't cost you 1.6 million Rand. It yields a 31% return on investment. So it is functionally the most profitable department in your company. So when do you pull the trigger? So based on our research into the 2026 South African market, here's how we think about the scaling decision. So below 5 million Rand in annual revenue, you are in what we call the stealth phase. You can't afford the full stack. And frankly, you don't need it yet. I mean, you can only focus on your cyber hygiene and your physical basics. And the budget on that would cost you around 15,000 to 25,000 a month. And you need to make sure that you do it well. If you're between 5 million and 50 million Rand, you are in the valley of death. So you are a target. Big enough to be noticed, but not yet big enough to absorb a major hit. So biometrics and enterprise endpoint protections are a non-negotiable at this stage, and that will cost you around 50,000 to 80,000 Rand a month. And if you make about 15 million Rand, the fortress is break even. So the option value alone, access to enterprise contracts that require compliance certification, more than pays for the stack itself. About 50 million, the fortress isn't infrastructure, it's identity. So you are a critical infrastructure for someone else's supply chain. So your security posture is part of your product. So if you are sitting at 15 million Rand and still haven't built the stack, you are not being capital efficient. You are being reckless with your investors' money. And what I'm going to talk about now is how you take this South African operating system and turn it into your competitive edge on the other side of the continent. So most people look at the 127,000 Rand monthly security bill and see a drain. And how I want you to look at it is as an expert license. I mean, there's a concept called hostility arbitrage. So the idea is if you develop the operational capability to run a business in a 70% hostility environment, the capability is worth an enormous premium when you take it to another 70% hostility environment. Because the skills, the systems, and reflexes you develop in the difficult market don't depreciate when you cross a border. They appreciate. So companies built in low hostile environments, and I'm talking about your Palo Altos, your London and Amsterdam, they often fail in the emerging markets, not because their products are bad, but because they built for infrastructure that doesn't exist in the markets they are entering. I mean, these guys, they bring glasshouse operating models into stone throwing environments. And a South African founder has been building in a hostile environment the entire career. And as of May 2026, the largest hostility market on the continent is growing fast and watching closely. So Lagos is calling. Lagos is a city of 20 million people with a GDP somewhere between 90 to $140 billion, which is larger than many African nations on its own. It is also a city where Infrastructure Hostility Index makes Johannesburg look manageable. So the power story in Lagos is not about the load shedding, it's about the grid being, for many operators, largely optional. Diesel there has followed the same trajectory as ours, and that includes your cost climbing and your supply being unpredictable. Security around fuel reserves are a real operational concern. So imagine a fintech company expanding from Sandton to Ikeja. They've built a great product. They rent a co-working space, and within 48 hours, they realize that the unstable power isn't a risk they can model around. It's a condition they need to design for. So uptime collapses, churn spikes, the Lagos team dies in 3 months. Now watch the Fortress founder land in the same city. Because they already spent 1.6 million rand building the operating system in Johannesburg. So they don't need to figure Lagos out. They arrive at a mobile fortress already assembled. So the redundant connectivity architecture they perfected during the load reduction cycles in Johannesburg. The dual ISP, the fixed wireless failover systems work identically in Lagos. So the biometric access control system they use to prevent internal collision in Sandton is immediately deployable to the Lagos stuff, where supply chain fraud through insider access is one of the most dominant operational risk. So the fuel theft sensor network they've built to protect their diesel reserves in South Africa, that's not just useful in Lagos, it's a competitor differentiator. To the Lagos market, this isn't really impressive security, it's just competence. But it's competence that their local competitors and the fresh off the plane global node companies don't have. And in a high hostility market, availability is the product. When your competitors are offline and you are not, you've already won the pitch. Here's the reframe I want to leave you with. South Africa is the R&D lab for the world's survival economy. We aren't just exporting coal and gold anymore. We're exporting the operational system for doing business in chaos. The playbook for running a productive company when the infrastructure is fighting you, for keeping developers focused when the environment is distracted, for maintaining uptime when the grid has other plans. You see, when a sophisticated investor or enterprise partner sees that you've kept a 35% company productive in Johannesburg with zero data breaches, meant 9.9% uptime through load reduction cycles, enterprise compliance certifications, and no incident triggered churn, they don't just see a team company, they see a team that can win in Nairobi or even Jakarta or even Mexico City. So the cost of expansion for a fortress company is structurally lower for a lean company, because the highest cost phase of expansion is learning to operate in a hostile environment. You see, Fortress founder has already paid that tuition in rands in the market where they built everything they have. So moving to Naira or Lagos is at that point largely a currency conversion. So if you're sitting in your office in Randburg or Cape Town today, looking at your security budget and feeling like you are being taxed for the privilege of working in your own country, you need to stop. You're not paying a tax, you're paying for a world-class education in a high hostility operation. One that the overwhelming majority of your future global competitors will never receive because they grew up somewhere that made it too easy. So build your stack, secure your people, protect your data. The world is getting more volatile, not less. And the people who know how to operate inside that volatility are the only ones who will be standing when it matters.
So this has been the Cornerstone Season 0 Episode 2, and the reason why I'm calling it Season 0 is to leave space for me to learn and understand what I'm doing, because I'm still new at this, so I'm learning from every episode I put out there, from how I collect my information to how I present it to y'all. So yeah, stay safe, stay structured, and stay uncrashable.